If you've been fantasizing about having a beautiful, well set up greenhouse like I have, then today's video is for you. Where I'm standing right now is my herb bed, but in a month or two, it's going to be an 8 by 10 foot glass greenhouse, but I don't really know how to set it up. So I'm gonna throw it over to Briana from Blossom and Branch and Chris from Fluent Garden to show you their greenhouse setups.
When I was looking at what kind of greenhouse I was going to get, I knew that I wanted to be able to start my seeds in it. Because we grow on a market scale, which means I start over 14,000 seedlings every season, I knew I needed it to be a workhorse, but I also didn't want it to be too big because we have to heat it in order to start our seeds in there. So the 6 by 10 size means that I can heat it fairly easily. Now we do have a solar grid, so that helps make it even more energy efficient, but if you go too big, it becomes kind of difficult to heat. We also had to decide whether we wanted it to be made out of polycarbonate or glass, and we decided to go with glass because we were starting our seeds in it. We're going to talk about that specifically. So first, let's pop over to Chris to hear about why she went with polycarbonate.
When I first got my greenhouse up and running, my main goal was to start a lot of plants from seeds as well as cuttings, but as you can tell, this space is kind of multi-use now where I overwinter plants as well as keep my subtropicals happy. Because I'm trying to do so many activities in here, I may want to upgrade to a larger size eventually or perhaps get a second one, but I really am liking this very manageable 8 by 12 greenhouse. And also it's the maximum size I can get on my property without needing a permit. Glass versus poly, the pros and cons. Is there really a right answer? Well, it's not really black and white. It depends on the quality and the thickness of the material, as well as a number of other factors. For my greenhouse, I have a twin wall polycarbonate glazing, so it's a durable, rigid plastic. And as you can tell, you can't really see through it. Pros and cons, some people don't like this aesthetic. I actually don't mind it because I can kind of stash things in the greenhouse without people seeing what's inside. But it does mean that the light transmission is not as good compared to glass. Two main reasons why I chose polycarbonate over glass is because there are large trees around me that are notorious for dropping limbs during storms. So really it's a safety reason. And the second reason is because it's a lighter weight and more economical compared to something like double wall insulated glass.
The materials this was made out of was one of the biggest decisions that we had to make when we were selecting our greenhouse. So I knew that I wanted to go with glass, and I wanted to go with glass because number one, I like the look of glass. I like that clear kind of floating greenhouse look. And also I knew that being in Colorado, I really wanted our seedlings to get used to the full sun that they get here. So because we're at 5,300 feet, we do get a lot of really intense sun. With glass, we get almost 100% light transmission, which is really great. Now, while that is all well and good, there are some downsides to the glass. One of the downsides of glass is the R value. So the R value of polycarbonate is going to be a little bit higher in general, unless you go with a double or triple pane glass. So ours was a single pane because that's all we could find. A single pane 3mm tempered glass so that in case it breaks, in case we get anything running into it or hail or someone throws a shovel or something, it wouldn't break and we wouldn't have glass shards all over the garden. So definitely go with the tempered if you're going to go with the glass. But the R value of this guy is about 0.96. So this is definitely lower than you're going to get with the polycarbonate. So something to consider. Now, speaking of impact and tempered glass, one of the things I do worry about with a glass greenhouse is hail. So we do live in Colorado. We tend to get a lot of hail. Usually we at least get 1 or 2 every season. And some of those hailstones can be pretty big. So obviously we'd worry about impact on this, but it has been through quite a few hailstorms. It's 4 years old now. It's been impacted with 1-inch size hail and it hasn't broken yet. So fingers crossed that that is going to bode well for its longevity. Speaking of longevity, that was the final consideration when we decided to go with glass instead of the polycarbonate. So going with glass means that we won't have to replace these panels so long as they don't get broken. Polycarbonate usually has about a 10-year lifespan, over which time it starts to get a little bit brittle, maybe it can get discolored, and so after about 10 years you should be replacing your polycarbonate. Glass, on the other hand, is going to last forever so long as it doesn't break, and that was a big consideration for us. There are pros and cons of both glass and polycarbonate, so really at the end of the day you kind of just have to choose which one is right for you and your garden. Let's go inside because my hands are freezing. Let's look at the inside of the greenhouse.
For the foundation, I didn't want a permanent concrete slab kind of style. So instead I went with 3/4 crushed gravel. So this was very inexpensive and easy to install. And also having this flooring allows for any water that spills onto the ground from watering to easily drain away, so you don't get any puddles on the ground. But it does cause a bit of a challenge when it comes to longer term maintenance, but more on that in just a sec.
In my greenhouse, I decided to go with a brick floor. And the reason I decided to go with brick was because we had a lot of bricks sitting around. So our house was built in the 30s. They demoed this garage and there's just bricks scattered everywhere. So whenever you can reuse a material, that's a great thing to do. So the brick does have another great benefit in the greenhouse, which is that it helps release a little bit of heat. So during the day when the sun is out, these bricks actually warm up. And at night, as the temperatures cool, these bricks release a little bit of that heat, and it creates a little bit of a warmer ambient air temperature. So that's a win for me. Let's pop over to Chris to talk about heating the greenhouse.
Both Brie and I use electric space heaters to keep the greenhouses above freezing. This is the little one that I use. It is splash proof and suitable for greenhouses up to 120 square feet. And because I have subtropicals in here, especially during the winter months, I try to keep the temperatures above 10 Celsius or 50 Fahrenheit, ideally a little bit warmer. To help keep the space cozy passively, on the inside wall on the north side, I have shiny bubble wrap, and this is to help reflect some of the light and heat back into the space. And under this workbench, I also have a partition to kind of make the space smaller so that the warm air stays concentrated where I want it to. So that's normally around the plants. Now, these little additions and tweaks may not make a big difference, but anything that can help me lower my electricity bill, I'll take it.
Now I do have two heaters in here. I have this one and I have a backup, and each one is on its own extension cord. The reason that I do that is because this happened to me in the past where a rat has chewed through one of the extension cords and the heat goes out in the greenhouse overnight and I wake up to freezing seedlings. It's happened before, so we have a backup that'll kick on in case it gets cold, and this one goes out. So I do have this little Wi-Fi enabled thermometer, so if anything happens and the heaters go out, so that it'll alert me if the temperatures go too high or too low, and it alerts right to my phone, which is really nice. But there's also a little trick that we have to help keep temperatures regulated for the seedlings that are germinating. We like to keep these on a heat mat, and so that heat mat, especially when the temperatures drop in the evening, that heat mat helps keep the temperatures somewhat regulated, so we're still able to get germination. Here, for example, we're looking at Lysianthus, and Lysianthus need a pretty specific temperature. They like to be warmer when germinating, and we are just starting to get germination in those, so success. We've talked about heat. Now let's talk about ventilation, because another concern is these guys getting too hot. Chris, what do you guys do for ventilation?
So keeping the greenhouse cozy is one thing, but even during the winter months, a long stretch of sunlight can actually increase the temperatures inside, which isn't actually ideal. So having a way for the heat to leave the greenhouse effectively is really important to keeping your plants healthy, whether they're young seedlings or mature plants. My setup mostly relies on automatic vent openers. So as the temperatures get hot in here, the hot air rises and those arms open up the two large roof vents that I have, and then the hot air can passively exit the greenhouse. I also have a third one at the back of the greenhouse, and when I open the door on the opposite side, it really helps to push the hot air out, keeping this nice and regulated. And during the warmer months, I have some fans in here. Nothing fancy, just stuff that you would use in the home. So something like this little guy. And during the colder months, I also use the fan to try to push around the cold, stagnant air that may settle in the corners of the greenhouse. And that just keeps everything nice and healthy, because you don't want any pest and disease issues hiding in those corners.
Now, because we're mostly seed starting in here, we're not really growing in here too much during the hottest part of the year, summer, where it would get up to 130 degrees in here, so I don't have to worry about ventilation too much, but I do have to make sure it doesn't get excessively hot in here when I'm seed starting. So we also use these gas piston window vents, and that just helps to regulate it so I don't have to come in here and do it myself, but we'll also open the door, and in the spring I'll also pop an extra fan in here if I need to really circulate the air. Speaking of ventilation on the roof, we do make sure that we have a nice pitch on this greenhouse. So this greenhouse in particular was made in Denmark, where they do get snow, so we knew that it was going to be rated for high snow loads. It does shed snow really well, but it's definitely something that you'll want to consider if you're in a zone that gets a lot of snow. You definitely don't want something with a flat roof or even a shed roof if you're in an area that gets heavy amounts of snow like we do.
The roof that I have is nice and curved with a high point in the middle, and what I found is that it sheds snow really, really easily. It basically just slides right off. And what I love about the poly panels is that it's smooth all the way from the top down, and I don't think I've ever had to sweep any sort of debris off of it, which saves me a lot of hassle. One of my favorite features are these shelves that I installed to 3 of the walls to make use of the vertical space. So using inexpensive bookshelf brackets and also some cedar fence boards, I increased my shelf space to fit at least 20 more standard size 10-20 trays. So that leaves me a lot of open space to do more activities and also store more plants. On the north side of the greenhouse, I have my workbench, which I built out of 2x4s and those inexpensive cedar fence planks. And then on the south side, which gets a lot more light, I have 2 of these heavy duty metal shop racks. And this is where I store the heavier items. And also in the spring, this is where my seedlings go because it captures the most sunlight on this end of the greenhouse.
When we're looking at shelving options, you can go a ton of different ways. The sky is the limit, and the layout of your greenhouse is the limit. So what we did is we actually just used these baker's racks. They're just wire baker's racks. And that way we can reconfigure these shelves if we need to. So some of these shelves, there's not as much space in between. And that lets us start shorter things in here. And then down at the bottom, there's a bigger gap where we can put things like soils. We can tuck equipment away. I also did a 3-shelf system because we have a small greenhouse and I need to start so many seeds in here. I need all of the space that I can get. Now we do also really like these because they allow for air and light transmission. They're not a big bulky shelf that blocks a lot of light or air, so we don't really have to worry too much about lights. But you can see we do have lights here on this middle rack. So let's talk about that next. Chris?
For lighting, I personally don't add any supplemental lights because most of the time during the winter, my plants are looking like this. They are dormant and they're just hanging out and overwintering. But come spring, when we are starting seedlings, the sunlight actually provides top quality light for those seedlings at that stage of life. So they actually stay stocky and healthy just with sunlight. So I've never had to put grow lights in here.
So because we're in a glass greenhouse that gets really great light transmission, we don't have to worry much about adding supplemental light, but I do still have lights in here and I'll tell you why. It is because I often work at night in the greenhouse. So I have 2 young kids. Often the only time I have to get out and actually get some work done is at night, so I need lights. And I like to have lights down low where it helps me work because I usually work on the floor. So these lights down here are helpful. But when the greenhouse is very full, so come last frost when I have everything in here waiting to get planted out, then we're usually using every single shelf that we have. So if we have all of these top racks here full, then we have to use these middle shelves, which usually I don't use until it's very full. If we go to put something here and we don't have lights, then these actually will block some of that light for those middle shelves. So we really only use these lights when we're having to use these middle shelves or when I'm out here working in here. And then it is nice to have those lights. And these are just basic fluorescent lights. They're really nothing fancy. Other than that, the sun is enough.
Throughout the year, I try to keep the greenhouse anywhere between 12 to 28 Celsius using a thermostat, which I can plug both a heater and a fan through just to help regulate the temperatures. The one that I use is Wi-Fi connected, so through my phone app, I can easily monitor and also adjust the settings, which is really handy. And in case the electricity goes out, I've got my handy low-tech min-max thermometer, and it gives me a reading of both the lowest and the highest reading of the day. Since I don't have access to a hose on this side of the garden, I rely on watering cans, so I've got big ones as well as little ones. And for freshly sown seeds that need to stay hydrated, as well as keeping the humidity up under humidity domes for cuttings, I like using a handheld sprayer, which adds a nice light application of water. Regardless of materials and setup, having the space organized and well maintained will help keep the space hygienic, and that will lead to a better growing experience and healthier plants. Generally, maintenance has been pretty straightforward and easy for me, So at the end of the season, I take a wet rag and just wipe down the panels with some water, as well as go along the inside perimeter and make sure there isn't any debris piles where insects or any sort of creatures could be making a home in. I mentioned earlier that gravel, although it's inexpensive and easy to install, it's not the easiest surface to keep clean, especially when you're working with loose materials like potting mix and random leaves, because I can't easily sweep off of this material. That's why tarps are my best friend, because once the work surfaces, including the ground, are covered, any messy work will land on top, and then afterwards I can just take everything outside.
In terms of maintenance, there's really not too much we have to do here in this greenhouse, but there are a couple things I do just to keep it clean and under control. I take everything out in the summer. I organize all my seed starting stuff. I vacuum all of the loose dirt that's sitting on my brick floor just to keep it clean. I also do wipe down the windows with a vinegar and water mixture to keep them sparkling and just to make sure I don't have any fungus hanging out in here. And then I go around and I check and make sure that all of these little gaps are full. So if there's been any cracking that's happening as we've been settling, little gaps between the frame and the windows, I'll go around and I'll take, you can see there's a little piece right here, I'll take a little piece of foam and I'll just kind of fit it right into that little gap, and that just helps keep the heat in here since we are heating it. That's pretty much it for maintenance. It's really pretty easy. If you have room for one, if you can swing it, I really love how much a greenhouse adds to a garden. It really gives you flexibility in terms of overwintering plants, extra room to start seeds, room to store all of your seed starting materials. And so we really enjoyed having a greenhouse. So Kevin, I don't know what you're doing over there in San Diego, why you don't have a greenhouse, but maybe you should get on it.
I'm definitely feeling a little jealous of the greenhouses I just saw, Briana, but there will be one here pretty soon, and if you subscribe, you'll be able to see the full build out. Check out some of our other videos, as well as some of the products on our store. We ship best in class products directly to your door. And until next time, good luck in the garden and keep on growing.